Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar session on Dataverse in Canada, leveraging an open data repository for research data stewardship. My name is Jennifer Abel. I am the training coordinator for the Digital Research Alliance of Canada's RDM team. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging today that the land which I'm speaking to you from is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. My colleagues in this session will be putting their land acknowledgements into the chat. If you'd like to add your own, please feel free to do so as well. We'll very shortly be posting a link into the chat where you can find information about the land where you're located if you need assistance with your land acknowledgement. So a reminder, well, for those of you who were with us for the last one, but maybe some of you are new, this series focuses on introducing the Dataverse repository and institutional services available for use in Canada today. It will showcase a diverse set of presentations related to current use cases and models, including an open discussion panel, which is today, and best practice guidance related to data curation for ensuring and enhancing the fairness of your data. So this is our Dataverse community panel featuring use cases from across Canada. Recent years have seen a rapid increase in the number of Canadian post-secondary institutions offering a Dataverse repository service. Today, we're joined by representatives from a number of Canadian institutions, large and small, for a panel presentation and a discussion that explores their various use cases, implementation decisions, and experiences. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. You have been muted automatically when you entered the Zoom room. This webinar is being recorded and the chat may be archived for those who are unable to attend. We encourage you to use the latest version of Zoom so that you have access to all of the features, including security updates. But if it asks you to update in the middle of the session, maybe wait until afterwards. Please use the chat feature if you are having technical difficulties or if you have additional resources to share. And please use the Q&A option to ask questions of the presenters. Questions will be addressed at the end. You may also raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. Questions may be asked in English or in French. We have a code of conduct that we follow here in our Alliance webinars. We seek to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone. Discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform, and the Alliance does not tolerate harassment in any form. Harassment is understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces an unsafe environment. So please play nicely while you're here in the webinar today. And with that, I will turn it over to our host for the first part of this session, John Huck from the University of Alberta.
Oh, actually, Jen, sorry, I'm going to give an introduction and welcome if you want to go to the next slide.
Excellent. Amber Leahy from Scholars Portal in the University of Toronto is going to give us an introduction.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks so much, Jen, and for everyone joining us today. I wanted to just give an opening remark here just to, introduce where we're coming from and to talk a little bit about the Dataverse service. So hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Amber Leahy. I'm a data and GIS librarian and the interim director for the Dataverse repository service at Scholars Portal, which for those of you who don't know is a digital library technology service provided by academic libraries and hosted at the University of Toronto. I'm pleased to introduce our discussion today, the second in the Dataverse in Canada series entitled Dataverse Community Panel, Use Cases from Across Canada. Today, we will hear from institutional service partners and engage in an open dialogue about Dataverse services and use cases. Just some quick history before we get started. In and around 2006, Dataverse began as an open source collaborative data repository project originating from its primary developers at the Institute for Quantitative Social Sciences, Harvard University. This collaboration has grown worldwide as research institutes, academic services, and libraries have adopted Dataverse as an open repository tool to support research data services that aim to make research data open and reproducible with a focus on research collaboration, data sharing, and reuse. As funders, publishers, and institutions increasingly encourage openness and with rapidness of technological change in digital research in which research data is an output, In libraries, we routinely examine what requirements are needed to meaningfully support access and preservation of research data, both now and in the future. In Canada, Dataverse is a widely accessible research data repository with 59 institutional service partners and growing that offers support for a variety of data formats and disciplinary use cases. Since the launch of Dataverse at Scholars Portal in 2012, it shares values with the academic library and research community because of its commitment to open science, research data standards, and community engagement. Our panelists today come from across Canada, representing institutions that are large and small that uniquely provide Dataverse to their researchers and engage collaboratively with community members in support of shared goals. Bringing together our perspectives today, I will pass you over to John Huck from the University of Alberta Libraries, who will be introducing our panelists and kicking off the talks today. Welcome, everyone. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Amber, and welcome, everyone. My name is John Huck. I'm the chair of the Dataverse North Expert Group, which is part of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, RDM Group's network of experts. More recently called the Portage Network of Experts. So there's a name change there. I'm also a metadata librarian at the University of Alberta, where I help support our Dataverse service. And so I'm very glad to welcome you all here today, and would like to give a warm welcome to the panelists as well. So each of them will speak for a few minutes about the Dataverse service at their institution, and then as has been indicated, then we'll move on to an extended question session. So as you can see, these are the panelists that we have today, representing different regions of the country and Dataverse installations, large and small. So our first speaker is Isaac Pratt, and Isaac Pratt is a research data management specialist at McMaster University. He is a research scientist by training with a PhD in anatomy and cell biology. Outside of RDM, his interests include open science and research methods. So Isaac, take it away.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Amber. So today I'll talk a little bit about McMaster Dataverse, what we are, what we do, and one of our major projects that's on the verge of coming to fruition. So a little bit about our Dataverse at McMaster. It's been operating since 2013, a lot longer than I've been around at McMaster, and it currently has 75 published data sets. So on the scale of Dataverses, we're pretty small, but we're kind of on the larger end of small. Taking a look at the statistics that are published by Dataverse, by Scholars Portal Dataverse, we are currently 11th in the Scholars Portal system for a number of data sets. So a little bit about how we run the Dataverse. Historically, it's been a very informal process where users could publish data sets or Dataverses basically at will, but we're currently in the process of really changing that and formalizing the deposit process and the curation process. So right now, we've recently published deposit guidelines and walkthrough documents for researchers to use the Dataverse. We've changed the way that researchers deposit data sets to be a mediated deposit. So the user can create a data set, but it then goes through a review process. And while we currently don't have a formal curation process, we are working to develop a strong curation process based on the recently updated Dataverse curation guide and publication. Dataverse, is a great platform, but it does have its challenges, which I'm sure many of you face as well. And the primary challenges for us here are around building awareness and use of the platform. you know, as I mentioned, it's a pretty small number of data sets that are on the platform, and it's been challenging for us to reach out to researchers and bring them on board the platform. Another challenge is communication with the researcher when they do decide to use Dataverse. You know, the review process is great, but there's not really a space for communication with the researcher on the platform. So any communication that we want to do with them, you know, about their data set has to happen off platform through email. And there are a number of questions that we want to ask people that, you know, I would love to be able to ask on the platform, like having them explicitly, you know, sign off that they have the rights to share their data. They're not sharing someone else's data, you know, without realizing that they can't do that. And then the third, you know, the big challenge, I think, is finding the right balance in curation. How much curation do we want to do? How deep do we want to go into data sets that people are submitting? And there's really a few trade-offs here. And I think, so one of those obviously is the time commitment of curation. The deeper you go into someone's data set, the longer it takes. A second trade-off is the ease of use of the platform for researchers. I really believe that the more friction you put between someone and uploading their data, the less likely you are to get a finished data set uploaded. We want to make the platform easy to use for researchers. We don't want them to have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get their data online. But of course, the third trade-off then is the quality of the data set. Obviously, we want to be hosting high quality data. So, you know, these are, I think, pretty common challenges, and I'm really excited to hear what other people have to say about them on the panel. And then another thing, so the last thing that I want to talk about is our recent project with the Canadian Journal of Economics. So I know that many journals out there require data sets with publications, and the Canadian Journal of Economics is one of those. They publish around 50 peer-reviewed papers every year. They have a very clear and very good data policy where they require that papers submit data and code to support replication. The journal has a data editor who reviews those products and does curation activities. You know, they require a README file. They have very, very clear requirements. But what they didn't have is a good platform for their data sets. So what they were using was simply the journal, the publisher page, and data sets would be attached to publications. But they were really looking for a platform to make their data sets more accessible and more findable, right? More fair. And Dataverse is, you know, an amazing platform for that. So what we've ended up with is creating an agreement between Mcmaster and the CJE, where Mcmaster will be a sponsoring institution so that CJE can be a root level Dataverse within Scholars Portal Dataverse. We have a template agreement available through Scholars Portal, and there's more info on the Scholars Portal website about this if other people come to you and want to make Dataverses for journals or for their labs that they want to have sort of independent of an institution. So the reason that the journal really, really liked Dataverse is, a few key feature sets. One of which is the review process, right? The ability to review and approve data sets rather than, automatically approve data sets. And then another, like I mentioned before, they want data to be findable and accessible. So the ability to create DOIs and the platform being indexed by search engines, these are key features for them. Other things like metadata are great features that Dataverse provides. And then they needed training and support. And so that's where we come in. We help the journal staff create training materials for authors to use the platform, and we help train the journal staff themselves and support them in their work. But with that training and support, comes a number of of roles and responsibilities, and these kind of need to be worked out between you and the journal about who is responsible for these various things. And for us, we agreed that most of these facets of Dataverse should be the responsibility of the journal. So training for the users, user support. If a researcher who's publishing with the journal has a Dataverse question, they should be going to the journal, not to us. So most of these should be the responsibility of the journal, but we're there to provide a backup with some higher level support and training for the journal staff themselves. And one key consideration here is data oversight. Who is responsible for making sure that the content that's uploaded to the Dataverse follows the Dataverse rules and is is not too sensitive or isn't outside of the user's ability to share. So I really think that journals can really help push open data, and Dataverse is a great platform for that to happen. Authors are already in the mindset of following journal requirements when they're publishing, so it's kind of a natural extension of the review process to include data sets. And many journals now are increasingly adding data requirements for publishing, whether that's a data availability statement or whether they're requiring data sharing or not. So that's a little bit about the work we do. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations, and thank you all for coming.
That's great. Thank you, Isaac. Okay, so we're going to move to our next speaker, who is Kaetlyn Phillips from the University of Regina. She's the Data Services Librarian and Geography and Environmental Studies Liaison Librarian at the University of Regina Dr. John Archer Library. Outside of data services, Kaetlyn reviews young adult literature for the School Library Journal, knits and crochets, and spoils her dogs. So over to you, Kaetlyn.
Thanks, everyone. All right, so our Dataverse. The University of Regina has been part of Dataverse since 2017, 2018. It was a little bit before my time. And prior to me becoming the data services librarian, its support and management was included in the general RDM duties of the research and graduate studies librarian. So it was very much included in RDM promotion as a service that we offer, but really for a long time, we did not see a lot of interest in data deposit. And we only had one data set in our Dataverse until about 2019, which also happened to be when I took over the data services role, and the role was revamped a little bit. So it was traditionally just like the DLI role, if you Data Liberation Initiative role, but now it's much broader. So RDM duties were assigned to me, and I'm currently the only person with assigned RDM duties at the library. So this means I have to very carefully balance my services and supports. But I do also get a lot of initial support from our other liaison librarians and of course the graduate and research studies librarian. So a lot of the initial screening in terms of RDM and data deposit and interest in Dataverse goes through them, and then it's often forwarded on to me. Where we saw an uptake of interest in our Dataverse was in spring of 2020. We partnered with a Saskatchewan nonprofit, the Great Plains Air Zone, to share their air quality data sets. So they wanted to make their data sets openly available for other researchers to use. They had really good air quality data specific to Saskatchewan. So it was really a good opportunity to partner with them. And just through press releases and discussion and discourse, that created some interest in our Dataverse. And then, of course, the other huge influence was the tri-agency RDM policy. So in general, RDM at the U of R is an emerging practice, and that's one of the reasons why our Dataverse is just really on the threshold of our researchers' awareness. So a lot of my role is building awareness and knowledge building on how to use Dataverse. Recently, I was able to survey our researchers, and part of my role now, especially with promoting Dataverse, is addressing some of the mixed attitudes about data deposit. So it's definitely recognized as a best practice, but at the time of our survey, which was in May of 2020, only 3% of respondents were sharing data to Dataverse, and 52% of our respondents were not sharing data at all or doing any kind of deposit. But on a positive note, we did have quite an interest in data deposit and data sharing. And in particular, 28% of our respondents were willing to use Dataverse in the future. So the culture is definitely changing. Part of the mixed attitudes and awareness building is just each discipline has very strong existing practices in terms of publication, data deposit, sharing data, open access type thing. So some of our disciplines, they are actually depositing their data, but they have established disciplinary repositories that they like to use. In other cases, we had researchers who they just had too much data to work within Dataverse. So those are my two biggest issues right now that I have to address based on these survey results, is trying to find that nice middle ground where people see Dataverse as a really good option. And where I'm going to get a lot of interest and where I'm currently getting more interest is our researchers who want to do data deposit, but don't have a lot of funding and also have smaller amounts of data. So how we've been addressing a lot of this is through lots and lots of professional development presentations and Zoom question and answer sessions where I kind of explain how Dataverse works and best practices and just building that awareness. Another place where we saw people gain more interest in Dataverse was I, along with another librarian, did a presentation on how data deposit, including Dataverse, because it assigns that nice DOI, is another way to measure research impact. And that actually created more interest in the service. So, current services. As I stated, I'm the only person with the assigned RDM duties. So that means I have to be very aware of how my time is managed and how my service is managed, and also the fact that as interest grows with Dataverse, I am going to have to adjust my services and supports. So the biggest part of what I do with Dataverse is the knowledge building through information sessions. And this started in 2020 with PD presentations to subject librarians and user services staff. Then I developed a one-page summary about Dataverse and services that I shared with the research office, with our faculty of graduate studies, that they could share with student researchers and faculty researchers. Then I started offering knowledge building sessions as part of a series that the library offers called the Research Tune-Up series that I created a spin-off on called the Good Enough RDM series. And I have a whole hour-long session just devoted to Dataverse and how to use it and so on. These sessions are offered every semester, and they kind of try to line up with major funding opportunities and also with like where there's not going to be a lot of time needed towards teaching duties or marking or so on. So sometimes we don't always hit our desired audience, which is why in the future I will, just to maximize time and meet needs, probably develop a series of video tutorials that people can refer to whenever they need to. So when a researcher requests access to Dataverse, I meet with them, discuss what their needs are in terms of data deposit, set up their account, and provide instruction on adding data sets and dataverses. And this includes going over best practices for data deposit, including making sure there's data documentation, there's appropriate file naming, and other sort of consistency checks. These sessions are usually about an hour. They can take up to 90 minutes, but they're very successful. That one-on-one interaction really builds confidence in the researchers on using the service, and also that the service is going to work for them and meet their needs. Once the researchers have gone through that session, just because of time management, they're on their own to start building their data sets. But before they publish, I actually go through their drafts with them and just make sure everything's been filled out accordingly. So you can see what I mean when I say, like, this is time consuming and it will have to change as interest increases. So for the future, one thing we have to do is with the tri-agency RDM policy, we are in the process of developing an institutional strategy, and that will include more formal implementation of how to use and access Dataverse, including creating documents to streamline the process and also kind of remove the amount of time spent in the one-on-one sessions. But because those have been so positive, I will continue to offer them. And the other big thing is really just more and more promotion. So because we are emerging, I still need to do a lot of that knowledge building and awareness building. So that's kind of where I see it in the future. Some of the concerns with the knowledge building and awareness building is many people on my campus still very much see Dataverse as the place to deposit quantitative tabular data. So getting out there and being like, no, this is how we can do work for qualitative data. This is how we can support these file formats, or this is how we can have levels of access if you don't want to fully make your data open, are sort of the next steps in future plans. So that's a little bit on the University of Regina. Thanks, everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Kaetlyn. Okay, so moving on to our next pair of speakers, we'll be hearing from Eugene Barsky and Paul Lesack from the University of British Columbia. So Eugene Barsky is the head of the UBC Library Research Commons, and when not dealing with research data or logistics of running the library, he enjoys coaching high school volleyball, learning Talmud, and experimenting with just exactly how much trombone practice his kids and animals could sustain in a day. And Paul Lesack is the data and GIS analyst at the UBC Library Research Commons. As a cyclist, he has been hit by cars 7 times. On that note, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, John. And our slides are available. Paul, if you don't mind to paste them in the chat. So it looks like I hope you don't see. Do you see my slides? It's unusual. It's a markdown slides, and they're available in GitHub. Anybody can confirm? Paul, can you confirm you're seeing what you're supposed to see?
Yeah, it looks fine to me.
Okay, thanks. Hey, thanks again for the opportunity to talk about our Dataverse and its scale. A difference in scale is actually fascinating because we are a large instance with these 2 dataverses, one a research dataverse with almost 900 datasets, and one licensed dataverse with almost 40,000 data files. So we plan to quickly run through a discussion about how we run those services and how, sorry, I will just escape that because it bothers me to see the screen, so this is better. And then we'll talk about the software platforms that we developed to connect and harmonize data between our Dryad connections and Dataverse. So I will get us started, and I will just mention that UBC Library started to work on RDM in 2014. in the beginning, we started with fully curated deposits. We took around 40 deposits from a professor emeritus, and they tried to make sense out of them. Those are data sets in health sciences. We had to hire a PhD student to curate them, and then after they were done, we had to spend more time ourselves to fix those curational issues because they were not that good. So full curation took, we wanted to experiment and see what it takes. And it takes a lot of time and resources because we had to create data dictionaries, we had to recode the data, we had to check the validity of data. And we understood the difference between data management and data curation. And we understood that we will not be able to do things like that anymore, where we have to sit down with researchers and create code sheets and create data dictionaries and make sure data is formatted and moved around properly. As a result, today, we move to mediated deposits. Users log in with the CAF authentication. They deposit the data themselves. Our great team of RDM, we have RDM librarian Doug Brigham on this call, and Paul, and myself, we review deposits, we consult with our users to improve, and then we publish the data. What we have observed that every data set needs love. We haven't actually seen one that was nice and clean. Common issues that we are seeing is the lack of data dictionaries. Surprising how many people are depositing data without code books. And we see corrupt data files all the time. We see insufficient metadata, and usually not just spatial metadata. So all those things we are trying to fix. We work towards data curation level 2, which we have defined ourselves as something to enhance discoverability of data and make sure the usability over time is useful. So we take care of the recommended metadata fields. We make sure data has a data dictionary, and we make sure that a person from that discipline will be able to understand and open and use those files. So that includes actually checking the files if they're valid. Example of how we would approach somebody who will not who deposited data, but it's just gibberish. We would ask for a data dictionary. We'll ask for data conversion. We will convert it for them. And it usually happens with almost every data set. This time, so we are doing it for a while now, this time we do allow and encourage a number of research groups to manage their own dataverses. We have a bunch, here's the example, Housing Research Collaborative has 20, and some labs have almost 40 data sets. And those are managed by the labs themselves. So we don't interfere, we train them, we trust them, we check from time to time, but we do not approve the deposits. So they manage the data purely themselves. So two kind of tiered approach. I'll move it to you, Paul, to talk about the Dryad.
All right, I hope you can all see my screen because we did a magical screen swap right in the middle. So in addition to everything that Eugene has talked about, researchers deposit data in the Dryad data repository, which is not in any way affiliated with Scholars Portal. Because we like to think of Scholars Portal as a sort of unified place where all of UBC's research output is placed, we've developed a tool called Dryad to Dataverse, which will automatically harvest data from Dryad and inject it into Dataverse. And because I assume that there are other universities around the world that use Dryad, we tried to make this as easy as possible and as portable as possible to use for other institutions, researchers, or anybody who wants to do this. So basically, it's a program that can be run off a cell phone, if liked, and creates a standalone database that monitors transactions and writes all the metadata from Dryad and normalizes it into Dataverse. It doesn't require any coding unless you really want to. As I said, you don't even need a server. You can run it off a platform. It can run on almost any platform, Linux, Windows, Mac, and it's freely available in open source, and the link is right there. The only thing that does require is Python 3.6, which, if you understand what that means, you're probably just fine to run it. And if you want to examine the source code, it's also right there, along with complete documentation. One thing that is different from what we're discussing here for the most part is a Dataverse installation at Scholars Portal. But UBC, I think, is one of the few institutions that also runs its own separate Dataverse installation, and that's for our licensed data. And that repository is called Abacus. So it's a completely separate thing from Dataverse at Scholars Portal. And I hesitate to call it the Western version of Scholars Portal, but it does have 4 institutions that are a part of our licensed data repository. So what we wanted to do with this is to have sort of a common feel between the two Dataverse platforms. It makes it easier for researchers who deposit data, but it also makes it easier for anybody who comes in to find data. If they're all both on the same platform, it's much easier. So we tried to make the same approach as Scholars Portal. Users authenticate with their campus-wide logins, in UBC's case, or a Shibboleth login, which I believe most of the people at Scholars Portal do. The difference between Abacus and Scholars Portal, as I mentioned, is that this is licensed data. So this is material that people purchase. It's not research data. It's more, for lack of a better term, general purpose data. And because it's shared by institutions, it has the way you share that data can be more complicated because you're sharing by license. So what we've done in order to facilitate that is to organize Dataverses by license. So that way you can have permissions to each institution assigned to each Dataverse. That means that it's readily expandable. If someone else wants to join our consortium, which hasn't happened yet, but may in the future, if they have signed a particular license, we can just then extend that university's permission to that Dataverse, and it makes it very easy. One thing that nobody has touched on is that for both Scholars Portal and for UBC, that we encourage researchers to use the API. It allows easy access to downloading the data and using it, which is important for a lot of researchers, but it also allows researchers to easily publish their data in other platforms. They can, if the API is readily accessible, then they can take the material from Dataverse and inject it into their website or whatever it is that they're doing. And this is one of the things that is sort of, well, it's more technical than most of the aspects of Dataverse when starting out, but encouraging researchers and students and everybody else to use the API makes Dataverse a much more accessible and readily available product. So I would encourage all the institutions that use Dataverse to at least have a look at the API and see what you can do with it. Now I will swap it back to Eugene for the concluding remarks.
I don't have any, Paul, so I can let the next person talk.
Well, thank you for John and all the other organizers for hosting us here at this panel discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Paul and Eugene. Great to hear about that work. Definitely some interesting innovations there. So we'll move to our next speaker. Louise Gillis is Research Data Management Librarian and Liaison Librarian for the College of Pharmacy and the School of Health Administration at Dalhousie University. Outside of libraries, she's into travel of the armchair variety these days, as well as good books and hanging out with her family. So over to you, Louise.
Okay, apologies, I was unable to unmute myself. Can anyone confirm they see my screen?
Looks good.
All right, great. So we'll start with a little bit of context. Dalhousie is a research-intensive university. It has approximately 20,000 students currently enrolled, and those students study across 4 campuses. So they're in Truro, they're in Yarmouth, they're in St. John, New Brunswick, and they're here, where I am, in Halifax. Halifax, with a population of 400,000 or so, is by and away the largest city in the Atlantic region. So that's us. You've got a research-intensive university. You've got us at mid-size institution, and we're located on the East Coast. Dalhousie's been involved with Dataverse since about 2017, and it was that year that it launched a local instance of Dataverse. And it did that in recognition that there was some call for a place for the community to deposit data. In 2018, Portage came out with some recommendations for a national Dataverse service. These recommendations were wholeheartly supported by us here at Dal, or I should say, by the Dal community. I wasn't here at the time. And what Portage was looking for was something that was robust, that was scalable, that was affordable, and that was open. So as I said, Dal was entirely on board. And when the possibility to sign on with Scholars Portal became available in 2019, Dalhousie jumped at it. So we've been with Scholars Portal since 2019. All of the new data sets that we've published since then have been published on Scholars Portal Dataverse rather than the local instance. And any of the data sets that were with the local Dataverse have been migrated over to Scholars Portal. In 2021, so just earlier this year, a little bit of a delay due to COVID, we were really confident with our choice to stick with Scholars Portal and to retire the local instance. And I think some of the reasons why we were really confident with that choice was just the community coordinated effort that Scholars Portal offers. So there's infrastructure development, there's training, there's support services, and it's, Scholars Portal is just, it's stable, well-established, and it has a voice in the larger Dataverse community. So really happy with our choice. And that brings us to where we are now. Again, really want to stress that we're all about that community collaborative, coordinated effort. And to that end, we have made a point of trying to be really involved in national training support and outreach. And that can be as simple as making a point of being at community calls, participating in panels such as this. And it also looks like us being involved in working groups. So a number of us have been involved in Portage working groups, in the Alliance, and in more regional efforts as well. One effort that I do want to highlight just now that's particularly relevant to Dataverse is the work Erin McPherson, my colleague, and I did on the Dataverse Curation Guide Working Group. And just last month, the Dataverse Curation Guide came out of that work. So for those of you who don't know, this is something that you might want to check out. It is a step-by-step guide on how to curate a data set in Scholars Portal Dataverse. I think the thing that might be quite appealing to people here is that it speaks to various situations. So whether full curation is within the realm of possibility. So if you've got the staffing and the resources to do that, well, great, there's information for you. But if you're less well-resourced, then there's still information for you there. So it's just it's quite a flexible guide. More locally, we're growing our capacity. So I was listening with interest when Kaetlyn spoke about the situation in Regina, and she's the only one really with RDM written into her responsibilities. At Dal, we're a little more fortunate. So I have RDM responsibilities written into my role. We have an RDM coordinator, and that isn't, in either case, it's not our only responsibilities, but we do have that as part of our job descriptions. And then we have others with RDM responsibilities written into their roles as well. And then beyond that, we've really tried to make an effort to make sure that our liaison librarians, for example, are comfortable enough with RDM or are aware enough of what's happening in the landscape to speak with their researchers or to direct them on when things get kind of hairy. We also do presentations for various units across the university. We do one-on-one consults with anyone that's interested in setting up Dataverses. And then we produce some local guidance like deposit guidelines. At the moment, we're using a semi-mediated model of curation. So I'm borrowing the language from the Dataverse curation guide. And basically what that means is we create a Dataverse for an interested party. And then we meet with those interested parties to provide guidance on best practice, to introduce them to the platform. And then we assign permissions. From there, the interested party does their thing. And then we offer a data set review as well. At the moment, we have 64 DAL affiliated user accounts, 42 of which were created within the last year. So there's been an uptick in interest, which is fabulous to see. And in the screenshot in front of us, you can see these are the top 15 Dataverse by datasets. And at the very tail end, Dalhousie's just made it into the count with a significantly smaller number than Carleton or UBC, but I think we're holding our own. A little bit more about how it works at DAL. What we have at the moment is that users will create an account at Scholars Portal Dataverse, and they do that using their DAL credentials. When they've done that, they're prompted to contact the RDM team by email, and then the RDM team arranges a training session. That training session is largely framed around a reference interview, which I have linked on the slide, and it addresses any number of different questions, but some of them include what kind of data the person is looking to share, how much of it is there, any restrictions that might be placed on the data, who owns it, and so on. Dataverse is very, very often a good fit, but it isn't always. So, you know, we wouldn't take anything that was sensitive, for example, and we can kind of head those off at the pass during this interview. If it is a good fit, though, then we will set up a Dataverse for that interested party, and we'll grant them permissions. Data will then be deposited, and although it's not required, we do encourage them to take advantage of a data review, which we're happy to provide. And so that is the situation at Dalhousie. If anyone's interested in learning more or speaking about situation with us, they can contact me or the team at data.management@dal.ca. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you very much. So we'll move now to our final speaker before we move into the Q&A session. And so I'm pleased to introduce Jonathan Dorey, who is a research officer in research data management at l'Institut national de la recherche scientifique, INRS, l'École nationale d'administration publique, ENAP, and Université TÉLUQ, which are 3 university members of the Université du Québec network. Jonathan is also a member of the development team for Dataverse at Scholars Portal, with responsibilities for French language translation, localization, and internationalization. Jonathan is a member of the Research Day Management Subcommittee at BCI and of the Data Management Planning Expert Group of Alliance RDM. So welcome, Jonathan, and over to you.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. For those who want to know, I also like kayaking and curling. So yes, I do have a lot of hats and I wear them. I probably should open a hat store. I'll be talking about the my experience and our experience at the 3 institutions that I support. I will paste a link in the chat. This is a presentation that we give, a very similar presentation or very similar panel to this one that we gave last year in April with my colleagues Eve at Université de Montréal and Daniel at Concordia. Donc pour ceux qui veulent le voir, là, on a donné mes collègues Daniel Denis et Eve Paquet-Bigra à l'Université de Montréal et à l'Université Concordia un panel similaire. Je viens de partager le lien. Pour les questions en français, n'hésitez pas. La présentation, par contre, va se faire en anglais aujourd'hui. So if you want to have a chat, look at that link. It's a presentation that was in French, very similar panel, but different context. So for those of you who don't know what I do, like I said, I wear many hats. I work for 3 small universities that are, well, small, not that small, but the 3 smallest universities in the University of Quebec network. I'm physically based at INRS in Montreal. I've given you a bunch of stats about number of faculty, number of students, the different campuses and the different areas of study that each of these 3 universities specialize in. Both INRS and INAP are graduate-only universities with master's and PhD programs focusing more on the research side at INRS. And while there is also a lot of excellent research at INAP, I believe that most of the students are enrolled in a professional degree. TÉLUQ does both undergraduate and graduate studies, and TÉLUQ is our distance university in Quebec. A vast majority of students, both at TÉLUQ and INAP, are part-time students, whereas at INRS, a lot of our students are full-time students. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of areas of study. It's still a fairly manageable number of faculty members, between 250 and 300, and again, a fairly manageable number of students. So it's basically as if I worked for one fairly large university, but I am the only one doing this. So I work with the research office and the libraries. My background is in information studies. And I've been hired since September 2019. So I've been in position for a little over 2 years now. I got to see what this means, what this work means outside of COVID. But the Dataverses have been published for all 3 universities, have been published and put online in December 2019. So we are coming up to the 2-year anniversary. There's been a very gradual uptake on Dataverse and data sharing at the 3 universities. Obviously, based on the area of research, that uptake has been quite variable. At INAP, which is public administration and social science research, it's been very low. At the moment, we only have 1 data set. At TÉLUQ, and I'll talk about more of the case at TÉLUQ in a minute, but there's 1 Dataverse that was set up for a colloquium. We have 28 data sets and 34 files. And at INRS, at the moment, we have 11 Dataverses. 6 are currently unpublished for a total of 9 data sets, 3 that are unpublished, and we have 1,045 files, and that basically includes the 1 outlier. We had a master's student who shared all the files for his master's paper, and that was 940 something files. So that 1 student accounts for a great number of files. Typically, we're looking more at anywhere between 2 and 15 files per data set. The different use cases that we have at all 3 universities are very similar. And at the moment, they're mostly focusing on data deposit coming out of a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, with the caveat that the requests that we are having now are coming at the end of the study. So these students haven't been formally trained in research data management. They haven't necessarily registered or been exposed to RDM as part of the curriculum or in different workshops, So the amount of work that I do with them to do the data deposit is probably more minimal than I would like, just because they want to get this out. They're done. They don't necessarily want to go back and rewrite a data dictionary and so on. So we do the minimum that we need to get this out of their hands and published. A second case that we are seeing a lot, and this has been increasing quite a bit recently, is for researchers, whether they are faculty members, postdoctoral fellows, or master's or PhD students, wanting to publish, and they go through the peer review and they have to share their data set. And therefore, in this case, there's a certain sense of urgency that this needs to get done pretty quickly. So again, this will influence the amount of curation that we do for these data sets. We are currently starting to see more discussions and certainly questions and interests about data deposit for end of project, but this is essentially faculty members that are in the planning stages of these projects. So we haven't formally done a data deposit from start to finish at this point, but this is oncoming, and certainly there are different presentations, webinars, and presentations that I'm doing internally that help sustain this. The case of TÉLUQ was for a colloquium that was done in the fall of 2019, I believe, or 2020. And this was a colloquium organized on open education resources. The presentations were all filmed, and they wanted to share those presentations with the community. We were discussing, and at TÉLUQ, there isn't at the moment a place or a repository for audiovisual material, because the faculty member that was involved with this project also has an interest, a research interest in open education resources. We decided to put these in Dataverse. You can always have a look at this. At the moment, it's only the MP4 files, if my memory serves me right. In the data set, you could also add PowerPoints and other material. It's a route that they chose not to take, but we could do it as well. So we have all these different kinds of use cases at the moment, and the interest is certainly growing. The process by which I do this is very much a case-by-case basis. So there's always going to be a discussion with faculty members or different researchers, whatever their status within the university. We typically create a Dataverse for every individual faculty members upon request. We can also create one for a research group, lab, or chair if that is more appropriate. We currently have 2 of those. We decided to go with also a student Dataverse in those cases where students are working on an independent project and they want to share the data. Certainly at NRS, most of our students are working on the funded projects of their supervisors, and therefore the data would go into the faculty members' Dataverse. But in the cases where they are independent, we have a space for them. And more recently, I also created a Dataverse for a postdoctoral fellow who was working on an independent project with a faculty member, but was considering portability in the future of that data set going to another institution. So I meet with these people. We talk about the requirements in terms of data deposit, the limits, what they can and cannot share, the issues of licensing, confidentiality, privacy, ethics, and so on. We talk about access and level of permissions. Faculty members are given admin privileges on their Dataverse. Their staff will be given a different list of roles or permissions based on that discussion. So sometimes they can publish themselves, sometimes I will be the one publishing. We also discuss the level of curation, which is highly variable, and the importance of enhanced metadata. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be dealt with. We are in the midst of our institutional strategy drafting, which will cover these elements, but it's really finding the right level of service that is needed for the team. Every team and every faculty member has different needs across 3 universities. Dataverse is not always the best solution. Sometimes I will recommend, although it hasn't happened yet, but I can recommend something else like Further or Disciplinary Repository. I do focus a lot on training. Right now, I'm in the midst of a webinar series or workshops offered through the library on research data management. There will be one on Dataverse and the DMP assistant in the new year. I've also done presentations as part of coursework. And the one-on-one sessions that I do with faculty members, I really take the consultant approach, but obviously at a much more affordable rate for them. I'm an employee of the university, therefore it doesn't cost them anything. And depositing something in Dataverse is also free, quote unquote. Dataverse in Quebec was negotiated by our Quebec Consortium of Universities with Scholars Portal. So all 18 universities now have access to Dataverse. And I believe this is it. So we can move on to questions or comments or discussions. I'll stop sharing this here. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you to all our panelists for speaking. And so I hope that the folks in the audience have started to think of some questions, but I'm going to pass things over now to Allison, who's going to mediate the next set of the session here, or the next part of the session.
Great, thanks very much, John. And thank you to all the panelists. Those were some really, really interesting presentations. And I'm sure we all like to hear a little bit more about your experiences with Dataverse. So I'm just going to kind of start off the questions. We've heard a lot about the collaborative nature of Dataverse right from the very beginning of its inception at Harvard, and that it's an open source product and has been shared widely throughout the world. And now to the use of Dataverse, and that data sharing can encourage collaboration and research. But can you expand a bit on how you see Dataverse as a collaborative tool, maybe ways that you can use it, such as things like collaborating with a journal, the Journal of Economics, the Canadian Journal of Economics, but also perhaps ways that it should not be used to collaborate in research. So I guess maybe we'll ask Louise first. Just mix it up.
Shoot. Sure, we can begin with me. Honestly, we don't really promote Dataverse as a collaborative tool. We definitely see its strengths in that, team members, regardless of where they're located, can take a look at the data. They can ensure that the metadata is looking good. They can essentially do some curation. But if we were talking about that active component, then we usually direct researchers to the DAL-supported solution of OneDrive, just because then we can sync to the desktop, and you've got the cloud-based storage. And then we would talk about moving things over to Dataverse when the files were ready to share sort of publicly. But I'm really interested in hearing a use case where somebody is suggesting a good collaborative use.
Great, thanks. Maybe we'll go to Kaetlyn. You mentioned that you use different levels of access. Is that a collaborative method that you're using? Or?
In terms of levels of access, with that, the researchers are specifically talking about like having the metadata openly available, but like restricting the file. But we do actually use Dataverse in the collaborative kind of working data phase with a lot of controls, because some of our researchers work with international teams from different institutions with varying levels of support in RDM. Dataverse is often seen as a good way to do it. Like within our institution, we do have filer. So teams within the institution will often use the filer, but the more international or multi-institutional teams will use Dataverse, again, with controls. So like anything that's labeled sensitive, I usually recommend they look into a paid secure cloud storage, just to cover the sensitive data. Anything where we do have some researchers that work with groups in countries that might have chaotic political systems or so on, where they have that little bit worry of people like getting access to their data, then we normally guide them towards more encrypted and secure forms of working data storage. But if it's just a case where like one team member is, say, in Scotland and another one's in Regina, where I am, and another person's in California, it is a good way to kind of share the data. And a big part of that is the constant stressing of save it, don't publish. Once you publish and it's not ready to be out in the open, it's a lot of work to get rid of it. So save, 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 don't publish until I've checked it with you. So we do have that level of collaboration.
Okay, great, thanks. Jonathan, do you guys use it for collaborative uses?
Not so much. What I do remind our users or future users is that Dataverse is not a tool that should be used to replace active storage. That is an ongoing issue that we have. So a lot of the collaboration questions are basically because they need a place for active storage. So it's not used for that. That being said, in some cases, I have suggested Dataverse because in terms of collaborating on at least data sets that are, almost finished and you need to share them amongst like a research team, Dataverse is actually quite interesting when you want to bring in people that are not academics. We're not close to other institutions. So you could get any one of your partners, be it in a nonprofit organization or industry partners, to create an account and then add these people to your Dataverse and share within that extended research group. So that's the way that collaboration can happen, but not for active researchers, not for active researchers, not for active data, definitely for active researchers.
Right, thanks. Eugene or Paul, you want to jump in here?
Well, generally speaking, oh, sorry, Eugene, you're about to say something.
No, go ahead, Paul.
We don't encourage Dataverse as a place, as people have said, for active data. There are much better tools for that. Depending on your discipline, you might want to be using something like REDCap or something else. The one collaborative mechanism that does see a fair amount of use, at least within the Scholars Portal Dataverse, is the use of private URLs for publication. I mean, whether or not you consider that really collaborative is debatable, but we don't really encourage the use of putting non-finished data into Dataverse, just because it ends up being a nightmare. Because of the automatic versioning system, it ends up being a nightmare from the metadata perspective, even from the people who are depositing data. They are often outraged that previous versions of the data exist when they're not meant for publication.
Thanks very much. And Isaac, you actually talked about the collaborative nature of Dataverse, but using it in a very different way, not for active data, but with a journal. So I think you kind of covered that collaborative nature. Did you have anything to add there?
I think we're kind of on the same page as everyone else in terms of the active phase, but obviously on the back end, there's always room for collaboration with other institutions and organizations.
Right. Okay. And there's a comment in the chat that the Italian Institute of Technology uses an unpublished Dataverse installation for data collaboration, and then once the data is ready for publication, pushes it to a different Dataverse installation. So that's an interesting idea. I think there was a hand up from Sebastian. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, Sebastian? Sebastian, are you there? Okay, the hand has been lowered. So I'm going to go on to another question. It was actually a question that I had, but is also in the chat during the question. In terms of promotion, what do you feel has been the best promotion methods that seem to work? And is anyone formally targeting graduate students specifically for awareness and promotion of Dataverse? Maybe we'll start with Isaac this time.
So I haven't done a whole lot of Dataverse specific promotion. We do regular webinars, and one of the ones we did just over the summer actually was on open data sharing, and in that there was a heavy Dataverse component, but I'm still planning out how I want to promote Dataverse at our organization specifically. I think we will be doing some kind of Dataverse webinar in the spring. In terms of graduate students, we do offer events specifically targeted to graduate students and postdocs. And so we advertise those, you know, working with the School of Graduate Studies here. I think graduate students and postdocs are a really, really good opportunity for outreach because they're the next generation of researchers. And in my experience, it's much easier to get people started on the right path early in their career rather than changing their habits once they're already established.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we find at Memorial as well. Maybe Eugene and Paul, do you want to speak to your promotion efforts? Or do you need to promote at this point? Or are you overworked?
We do too much promotion, I feel, and again, you pay for the work. So we have a relatively large instance. We see deposits every day. We could do more, but again, there's a price for it. Because we'll see more deposits. We prefer, and Doug is here on the call too, but I think at this point we prefer self-guides. We developed a bunch of one-pagers that we give to our users, a one-pager how to deposit data sets, one-pager for more advanced deposits, one-pager for admin for Dataverses, and they have been really helpful because those the one-pagers can really get people started and answer most of the questions. Paul, what do you think?
Yes, all of those things are true. One of the things that you were asking about was promotion for graduate students, and we do have some of that as well. There is a program for the Masters of Geomatics in Earth Science. I probably have the name of the program incorrect, but they have their own Dataverse set up for depositing all of their projects there. So that was one of the things that we instituted this year, and it does seem to be quite popular.
Oh, wow, that's excellent. So going from a large institution like UBC down to maybe not small institutions, but maybe Dal, where you don't have as many data sets, how do you handle promotion?
So I think that the tri-agency has taken care of a lot of it for us. That just that it was published, and we're definitely seeing an uptick in interest. And then journals themselves requiring data deposits. So I find that a lot of people that are coming to us because they need to deposit their data rather than they're looking to do the right thing. So I think that's directing a lot of the traffic. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we're really just trying to build capacity, which means that the liaisons themselves have some sense of what's happening in the RDM landscape. And so then when they're in conversations with their faculties are kind of like passing that information and that messaging along. And then just, multiple channels. So participating in these larger community discussions, more local Atlantic region discussions, and just really just keeping the conversation going is how we've sort of approached it.
Okay, great, thanks. And Kaetlyn from Regina, you said you're starting to get a lot more work now. So do you do promotion, or are you holding off on that because you're just a one-person shop?
I do a fair amount of promotion. So like I said, I have the Good Enough RDM series, and that is actively promoted to our graduate students. I work with the graduate studies coordinator in that faculty. They pretty much create like a course calendar of sessions that grad students can attend, and mine are always listed on there along with the research liaison librarian sessions. Where I tend to see people coming to me is they've actually been referred to me by, at least in terms of grad students, by their faculty advisor. And it's, again, like Louise mentioned, usually they have to publish their data as part of a publication requirement.
Excellent, thanks. And Jonathan, do you guys do much promotion? Is it all the same effort across all of the institutions, your promotion, or does each institution do their own promotion?
So far, it's being driven mostly by me, so it's mostly the same. The approach will be slightly different at each of the 3 universities, but I've given talks on RDM and on the policy at faculty meetings at certainly 2 out of 3 universities. The other one is in the works. We've launched a series of webinars, which will repeat every year on RDM, Intro to RDM, Dataverse, and the DMP Assistant, and then more coming down the road. And I've been giving a presentation, an invited presentation as part of a master's course that dealt with research methods and ethics, the course, and I talked about RDM. So yes, we are reaching grad students, but we're also slowly reaching faculty members. And whenever librarians or even people within the research office have questions about RDM, they are redirected to me.
Awesome, thanks very much. So there's a few questions in the chat about the Dryad to Dataverse initiative. Paul, could you speak a little bit more about the Dryad to Dataverse initiative and whether it harvests all of the data or just the metadata, if it keeps the same DOI, if you mint a new DOI when it goes into Dataverse, what citation would be best to use, either the Dryad one or the Dataverse one? So can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. Well, the product itself, it's three separate things. So there's a metadata converter that can take Dryad JSON and convert it into Dataverse JSON. And if any of you have ever worked with those things, you would probably not prefer to work with raw Dataverse JSON because it's kind of complex. So from a researcher point of view, that's great because if you use Dryad, you can just type something up, and then if you know how to use Python, you can convert it to JSON and upload it. The product itself will take a study well, I'm just going to use the same terminology as Dataverse. It'll take a Dryad study complete with its data, and it'll take the newest version in the first instance and translate all that metadata into Dataverse JSON, create an entirely new Dataverse study, and then copy over any of the data that it can. So Dryad doesn't have the same file size limitations as Dataverse does, especially at Scholars Portal. So there are some gigantic files there. So it'll copy over everything it can, and it creates a new Dataverse study, which has a different DOI. Now, this is one of those controversial things that we could probably all argue about for months. But the reason we did this is because UBC wanted to harmonize its collection. The data is the same, and the metadata from Dryad that is copied over to Dataverse includes the original DOI, so that the DOI isn't lost, and the entirety of the Dryad metadata is also included as a separate file. So there's one extra file that comes over on the file transfer, and that is the Dryad metadata. So it's all there, so that the entire chain of ownership can be traced. If there's ever an update, if you run the Dryad to Dataverse program as a service, there's a little persistent database that lives on whatever platform you're using, and it will update the Dataverse study with any changes from Dryad in Dataverse. The only manual step that's there, and this is by design, is that all publication has to be manual. I mean, it's easy enough to automate it, but because, at least initially, the material that got placed into Dryad didn't have any real curation on it. We wanted to have a look and made sure it met our standards. So it goes in, and then the entire software will email you at every step. So if there's something new, you'll get an email saying, there's a new thing from Dryad to Dataverse. Do you want to have a look and publish it? That's probably more than you were looking for.
No, that was great. That was an excellent clarification. Thanks very much. Excuse me. And can you also just expand a little bit on what you mean by the Abacus Dataverse containing licensed data rather than research data? I know this is answered already, but other people might want to learn a little bit more about that.
By licensed data, we mean like basically commercially purchased data sets. They aren't the products of research data. There's things like commercially available GIS data sets, or things like StatScan census data, which is used in research, but the purpose of this is not a research data set, and it's not created by a researcher at an institution. So, I mean, obviously, all data comes with some sort of license. Well, I wish that were true, but like it should come with some sort of license, but these are more general purpose data sets. And the way Abacus works is, for example, many of you are members of the DMTI consortium. So these are commercially available geospatial data sets. Those are placed into a separate Dataverse called DMTI because, you know, we didn't use a lot of original thinking in making names. And if an institution is a member of Abacus, that institution gets permissions to access that data. So the metadata is available for everyone to see, but to actually download the data set, you need to be a part of the consortium and have the correct permissions to download. So that's what we mean by licensed data. I mean, really, data is just data, but it's not research data. So it doesn't really belong in something like Scholars Portal because it's not the same thing.
Right, that makes sense. Okay,
yeah, and unlike Scholars Portal, Abacus is using handles rather than DOIs. So the material is not assigned a DOI. So if there's a DOI associated with the data set, that'll still be in the metadata somewhere. But if you type in, there is no, you can't type in a DOI and it takes you to Abacus because that doesn't exist.
Right, okay, perfect, thanks very much. Is there anyone else with their hand up? I can't see any hands. Are there any other questions? We have a couple minutes left, probably time for one more if there are any more questions. Don't see any more in the chat or in the questions. There is a question that's been partly answered, but is it common for organizations to use other generic repository platforms like Figshare in Canada, or is Dataverse becoming one of the most popular ones? And that question might be better answered by maybe Amber, or anyone on the panel can take that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just chime in a little bit. I mean, it's interesting that you're saying, Philip, like in Great Britain, they're running tenders for these types of things. I think in Canada, you know, the initial interest in something like this sort of rose out of a very grassroots community effort by libraries to support this type of research data deposit and repository services. So there wasn't that culture of the sort of commercialization of these types of services appearing in Canada quite as much, or the need to sort of have a commercial service be providing this service. So it's just a little bit different, but it's a really interesting case that you've highlighted for us and for us to reflect on here in Canada, that it is quite different and the landscape is very different here.
Okay, and there's one more question. Wondering what platform Further is running on.
I answered it quickly, Alison. So the backend for Further, and maybe there are further people here. I can't see Lee or anyone right now, but the backend is Globus, which is really this space. The front end is Open Collection CDC right now with Elasticsearch, and the preservation is done in Archivatica. So it's a custom solution with multiple components.
Great, thanks. And I'll turn it over to Amber for concluding remarks with one more question. What is the status of data preservation for Dataverse as of now? So I'll let you answer that and then sign off for us. And thank you to all the presenters.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison, and all the panelists. You know, just to touch base, we recently swapped out the sort of back-end storage of Dataverse this year to a completely library-owned, secure, cloud-based storage called the OLRC. And built within that system is replication of files across 3 nodes at different universities across Ontario. We're hoping to expand beyond Ontario to include other universities, storage backup for Dataverse datasets. So it has this preservation built into the storage, which is really nice to see. But in addition to that, we've also over the years been really involved in integrations between Dataverse and archival systems like Archivematica. So there is an out-of-the-box option for you, those of you that are using Archivematica, to actually harvest metadata and data sets from Dataverse and bring it into your local archival systems using Archivematica. So that is an option. And then Scholars Portal offers a service called Permafrost, which allows you to integrate your various repositories with a service like Archivematica to then manage those in a separate preservation system. So I would say that's my answer to that. And I encourage you all to reach out and find out more from each of the panelists about their institutional services, about preservation services, and we can continue this conversation about preservation of research data, which is really important, and as you've heard from everyone here, is really important to institutional libraries. So thank you so much. And thank you to the moderators today and to Jen Abel and the Research Data Alliance. Thank you so much.